Hello everyone! As you probably know, detailing plays a huge role in making 3D models and game assets feel realistic. I created this metal helmet and armor model, and as you can see right now, it doesn't have any detail and doesn't look very interesting yet. But I'm going to use a set of brushes to transform it from this into this. For the first step, I'm going to apply a layer of noise across the entire model using the displace modifier. This helps create a solid base so very fine details can be distributed across the whole surface of the model. As you can see, the result looks pretty strange yet because I haven't applied any texture yet. But first, I'm going to adjust the strength and lower it until the effect feels more balanced. Now I'm going to go into this section and choose one of Blender's built-in textures. For example, something like noise or musgrave could work really well. And now I'm going to tweak the size to see which one produces a more natural and realistic result. Okay, so I'll go back to the modifiers section and adjust the strength again until I finalize this stage. You can also do this during the texturing phase, but I prefer to handle it right here. Actually, I also tried the clouds texture afterward and ended up going with that because it felt like a better fit for this helmet. Alright, at the end of this stage, I selected the rest of the models as well, and then copied the helmet's modifier to the other assets by selecting the helmet and pressing Ctrl-C. To do this, you need to have the Copy Attributes add-on enabled. Now, back in Sculpt mode, I need to apply the modifiers I've added, but I'm not using the regular Apply option. Instead, I choose Apply as Shape key, and I'll explain why in a moment. I go to the Data tab, and as you can see in the Shape Keys section, I have two options, Basis and Displace. The basis refers to the original untouched model, while Displace corresponds to the modifier we just applied. Now if I set the value to 1, you can see that the texture which temporarily disappeared after applying comes back. The reason I used Apply as Shape keys is that it lets me control the intensity of this texture even after applying the modifier by adjusting the value between 0 and 1. Also, by changing the Range Max option, I can increase this range beyond 1. Now, by setting the value to 2, you can see how much stronger the effect becomes. But I'm fine with value 1, so I'll continue with that. So I'm going to follow the same process for the rest of the models as well. And now it's time to add more detail layers using brushes. I'm using my own metal imperfection brushes for this. A brush kit that includes base textures, damage and scratches, dents and holes, and welding effects. I'm going to start with a few of the base textures. And I think this one is a good start. If you notice that the brush is slightly deforming the model, press N, go to the Tool tab, and adjust the Sample Bias option under the Texture section. For example, here 0.2 is a good value to fix this issue. Now let's try using shape keys for the brushes as well and see how it works. I click the plus icon to create a new key. Then I start brushing on the model, and as you can see, if I change the value, the intensity of the applied brush on the model also changes. This gives us a non-destructive workflow for using brushes in Blender with the help of shape keys, similar to how you can work with layers in ZBrush. I can save these shape keys along with my file, and later if I'm not happy with any of them, I can either delete them or adjust their values up and down. I can either assign a separate key for every brush stroke, or I can create a single key and use multiple brushes on top of it in a combined way. Alright, I can keep following this process to cover the areas I want. However, it's important to keep in mind that I shouldn't overuse these brushes or add too much detail, because it can end up looking bad in the render and take the model away from a realistic result. Of course, this also depends on the final texturing and lighting, but it's still something you need to be careful with. Also, shape keys help a lot here, because if you test the lighting and don't like the result, you can simply increase or reduce the intensity of the details without having to redo the detailing on the entire model from scratch. A better approach is to use these brushes in a combined way instead of relying on just one or two brushes for the entire model. This helps avoid a repetitive look for the viewer. On top of that, you don't need to cover every part of the model with detail. In some areas, the initial cloud's texture we applied is already enough. I can even go back over areas where I've already applied brushes and add more detail again to avoid the surface becoming too uniform and repetitive. Alright, I think this is enough for the helmet for now. I'll move on to the armor, but I'll come back to the helmet later to add more details. So now I want to add some damage to the edges and then apply some scratches across the surface of the helmet. Let me mention a new point here. Sometimes I want to fade or soften the effect of a brush on certain parts of the surface. In ZBrush, you can use a morph brush for this, but Blender doesn't really have an equivalent brush. The workaround is to use Vertex Groups instead. So I click the plus icon to create a new group and rename it, for example, to Mask 1. Now I need to go into weight paint mode and define the areas on the model where I want the effect to fade out or disappear. The weight value here should be set to 1, and then from the weights menu, you choose Set Weight. So the entire model turns red, so a weight of 1 corresponds to red. Now I set the weight value to 0. 0 corresponds to blue, and wherever I paint over the red areas, it reduces the influence in that region. If you're not familiar with weight paint, it might feel a bit confusing at first, but you'll understand how it works pretty quickly. So back in Sculpt mode, I can see that the area I painted blue hasn't faded yet because I haven't assigned this Mask 1 Vertex group to the Shape Keys section. So I select Mask 1 here, and as you can see, the area I painted in blue now fades out the effect. If I want to bring the effect back, I can either return to weight paint mode and paint over the blue areas with red again, or I can simply delete the vertex group I created entirely. In the end, I prefer the previous one. Now, it's better to work a bit more on the edges first, and then add some scratches across the surface. You also need to be very careful when adding scratches. Overusing them can take the model out of a realistic look and make the result visually unpleasant for the viewer. When adding scratches, you should experiment a lot to see which result works best. Also, having reference images really helps you achieve a better outcome. Using dent brushes can be somewhat useful, but in the end, I didn't use them for this case. However, they can be great for models that look like they've been kicked or hit, like a can, or for creating impact damage from a car hitting objects. One final point. You can disable all the keys you created by unchecking them, so it looks as if no changes have been made to the model. And whenever you want, you can bring them back again or delete whichever ones you don't need. You can also choose Apply All from this menu to permanently bake everything into the model, but once you do that, you won't be able to edit or adjust any of the keys anymore. So you should only do this when your model changes are completely finalized and you're ready to export your result from Blender. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video. And now, let me show you the final result of this work.